The myth of biblical Jews. 1. Misunderstanding identity. The term Judean Way of Life appears in the Bible around the 6th-5th century BCE. This term does not denote a religion in the modern sense, like Judaism, but rather a set of tribal customs and covenantal practices designed to preserve lineage and uphold the covenant with Yahweh. These practices structured daily life, ritual observance, and communal identity among the people of Judah, blending social, cultural, and religious elements into a cohesive framework. Judean way of life at this time is not synonymous with the modern concept of Jewish. Modern readers often encounter translations of biblical texts that use the word Jew instead of Judean. This can create a misleading impression, projecting contemporary religious or ethnic categories backward onto a period where such concepts did not exist. Misunderstanding this translation risks conflating first-century regional and tribal identities with the universalized notions of Jewish identity that emerged much later. 2. Regional, not ethnic, identity. The term Judean predates the modern word Jew. Those living in Judea did not conceive of themselves as representing all of Israel. While part of the broader Israelite heritage, first-century Judeans understood themselves as a regional group associated with the southern kingdom and its traditions, rather than the entirety of Israel or its 12 tribes. Modern notions of Jewish ethnic identity, which assume some kind of continuity with historic biblical Israel, are therefore anachronistic. Claims about genetic continuity linking modern Jews to biblical Israelites are unprovable and unscientific. The concept of race as a category did not exist until the 18th century at the earliest, making any retroactive application of genetics highly speculative. Even if one attempted to apply modern genetic frameworks anachronistically, there is no way to link contemporary populations to a specific era for which no records or DNA samples exist. By extension, if by Jew a modern person means someone who follows Judaism, such a person did not exist in the biblical period. There was no religion structured like modern Judaism, and no concept of a unified Jewish identity as it is understood today. 3. The evolution of identity. By the late Second Temple period, roughly the last few centuries BCE and the 1st century CE, the term Judeos, Greek for Judean, began to acquire both regional and cultural meaning. Outsiders, especially Greeks and Romans, used it broadly to describe anyone associated with the people who worshipped the God of Israel and observed the Torah. However, this still did not equate to a single, codified religion called Judaism. What existed was a diversity of local and sectarian forms of the Judean tradition, Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and others, each interpreting the Torah differently. Among these groups, the Pharisees introduced a particularly innovative and consequential idea that, alongside the written Torah, there existed an oral Torah, an unwritten body of divine instruction transmitted through human teachers and authoritative interpretation. This notion of the divine authority of oral tradition marked a decisive break from earlier Israelite and priestly beliefs, which had placed primary authority in the written scriptures and temple ritual. Crucially, this innovation introduced a new authority, the rabbis themselves, who now mediated interpretation and law. By emphasizing oral tradition, they shifted authority away from the preeminence of the scriptures and temple ritual, creating a new religious framework centered on interpretation and teaching. It was this combination, oral tradition, rabbinic authority, and interpretive flexibility, that laid the groundwork for a new religious order. When the temple was destroyed, the old system could not be restored. Instead, the rabbist framework allowed them to create something entirely new, a religion without sacrifice, hereditary priesthood, or land, built instead on study, debate, and interpretation, the unprecedented system that would later be known as Rabbinic Judaism. 4. Mislabeling biblical figures. Applying the modern concept of Jew retroactively to biblical figures creates a historical anachronism. Contemporary Judeans would not have considered figures like Jesus or other Israelites as representing all Israel, nor would they have used a term equivalent to Jew as it is understood today. For example, Jesus spent most of his life in Galilee and Nazareth. Among other Israelites, he would have been identified as a Galilean or a Nazarene, reflecting his local upbringing and residence. From the perspective of Romans or Greeks, he might have been labeled a Judean, but this designation was a provincial generalization rather than a reflection of identity. 5. The end of the temple system and the birth of something new. What we now call Judaism, the system of belief, law, and identity that defines Jewish life today, did not evolve seamlessly from the world of the Bible. It emerged only after that world had ended. When the Second Temple fell in 70 CE, the ancient system of priesthood, sacrifice, and covenantal nationhood collapsed with it. The loss of the temple was not simply a crisis of continuity, it was the destruction of the very framework that had defined Israelite and Judean existence for centuries. What arose afterward was not a direct continuation, but a reinvention, a new religious civilization forged from the remnants of the old. The new authority of the rabbis now guided interpretation and law, replacing the priestly hierarchy and reorienting authority away from the preeminence of the scriptures and temple ritual toward oral and interpretive tradition. Rabbinic leaders, working in exile and absence, reimagined covenant without temple, worship without sacrifice, and identity without land. This new system, Judaism, was not the religion of the Bible, but the one that replaced it. It was the beginning of something entirely new, a post-biblical faith that transformed pieces of Israel's ancient tribal covenant into a portable, interpretive tradition capable of transcending history itself.